I think most GMs have been in this position before. You've spent a few hours preparing for your next session. Maybe your players are trying to enter a cursed tomb or a well-guarded building, and you're trying to think of different ways to challenge them besides resorting to the usual combat. And then it hits you. A puzzle. A good puzzle will be a compelling change of pace that keeps things interesting for your players. And you haven't really had the chance to do one of those in a while. Puzzles are an iconic piece of game design designed to test the player's wit and ingenuity. Whether it's through interesting mechanical interactions, creative problem solving, or just learning more about the world's lore, puzzle solving can be a really great way to immerse your players into the game's world and setting. However, while puzzles can be extremely memorable, they often fall flat, or worse, frustrate your players and drain them of their energy for the session. Hello everyone, my name is Ian from Incendium RPGs, and today we're going to be talking about compelling puzzle design for your TTRPG games. Before we really get started, it's time for another subscriber roll-off. Today I've got the die that I use mostly for wizards. I don't know what it is, but something about that blue color mixed with the sandy gold drops just kind of screams intelligence-based caster to me. I'm going to roll a persuasion check, and you guys get to set the DC with your own d20. If I beat it, you guys will have to subscribe to the channel. If I lose, then, well, I guess I'll catch you on the next one. Here we go. 14. Not too bad. Let's see if you guys can beat that. What makes puzzles interesting in a TTRPG is that they are a great change of pace that exist outside of the normal expected protocols of the game. While combat has certain puzzle-like elements in it, such as trying to find the weakness of an enemy, any player who has a certain level of experience in a system will have certain expectations about the protocols of combat. For example, in 5th edition, combat is initiated by rolling dice to determine the turn order, and then using your actions, bonus actions, and movement to resolve it. Most of the time, the objective of combat is to reduce your enemy's hit points to 0. However, we're going to be narrowing our focus a little bit to exploration puzzles. These are the ones that involve some kind of interaction with the environment to solve, rather than just going straight into a fight. This could be anything from putting a weight onto a pressure plate, redirecting some light, or solving a good old-fashioned riddle. The key benefit to introducing a puzzle in this manner is that the players will have all of their resources at their disposal to use in creative and unorthodox ways to figure out the answer. To compare to combat again, choosing a less than ideal solution could result in a character's death, meaning that the player just doesn't get to play anymore. The stakes in that scenario demand the player to make the most out of the turn to avoid failure. But with an environmental puzzle, there are a lot of alternatives to the hit it till it dies strategy of most combats, which leaves the player uniquely rewarded and satisfied upon completion. The main challenge is that to present a puzzle that's worth solving, you as the GM have to figure out the balance between withholding information and revealing information. Withhold too much and your players will end up feeling frustrated and maybe even resent the puzzle. Reveal too much and the players will probably find it too easy and not very compelling at all. That's why you have to determine whether or not a puzzle is appropriate for your table, and so we recommend that you ask yourself some of these questions. When do you play? If you tend to hold weekly sessions after everyone's getting home from work, they may already be too exhausted to really get invested into a mentally taxing puzzle that you have prepared. How long do you play? If you tend to only play for an hour or two at a time, your players may rather progress the story or roll some dice in combat than solve some puzzle that could dominate the entire session. How prepared and organized are you to give guidance and clues to the players? We'll touch more on this later, but the success of a puzzle really hinges on communication, investigative, and processing skills of both the GM and the players. How crucial is the puzzle to the narrative? If the puzzle is a little too difficult and your narrative can't continue without it being completed, the players may begin to get really frustrated and drained after trying their best to solve it for a long period of time. This last one is really important. How do you plan to let each member of the party contribute to the puzzle's solution? A common criticism of TTRPG puzzles is that they test the player's ingenuity, not the characters, when it comes to solving them. It's really easy to find testimonials online of the -1 intelligence barbarian figuring out the solution to the puzzle with ease, while the wizard with a +8 to investigation is left completely dumbfounded. And there's also this question of turn order. Should your puzzle have a turn order, kind of like in Initiative? Would this smooth things out or make things more difficult for players to communicate? This is something we actually polled you guys on our channel, and most of you said that it kind of just depends. If there's some sort of immediate threat of failure or combat for the players, then a puzzle with a turn order could be the right answer. In the end, I just think it comes down to the feeling that you're trying to give your players when they're tackling this problem. The most important thing is really just preserving the player's immersion and avoiding any sort of disappointment when it comes to the role that each person has to play in its solution. Everyone's character should have a chance to shine in a way that suits their build. Consider spending a few sessions with your players and getting to know the character dynamics before presenting a puzzle to them. After all, your table just might not be suited to puzzles, especially if it's early in the game when everybody's still trying to get to know each other. And that isn't to say you shouldn't use a puzzle at all, it's just that you need to prepare it thoughtfully and carefully. Make sure, of course, that you have a few alternatives to the session if it's discovered that it's not a good idea to use it this time around. And when I say prepare the puzzle thoughtfully, I don't mean to make it as intricate as possible. Oftentimes, TTRPG puzzles can become really involved, and players may get confused on even the simplest of clues, turning a 5-minute puzzle into half an hour or more. Intricate puzzles may engage specific groups, but they're just not designed for everyone. So let's get into the specifics of compelling puzzle design now. One of the most helpful breakdowns of strong TTRPG puzzle design comes from an article on Nerdolopedia titled Crafting Better Puzzles for Role-Playing Games, linked in the description below. It organizes puzzle design into a digestible sequence of elements, which we'll use to create our own sample puzzle by the end. We highly recommend reading this article for yourself. While there are a few sections that we won't really be getting into today, we found that these particular elements were conceptually helpful when building our puzzle. They list as follows. 1. A core mechanic. 2. Obstacles. 3. The catch. 4. Folded mechanics. And 5. Clues and feedback. Let's start with the core mechanic. The core mechanic is anything that leads to the progression or solution of the puzzle. This could be putting weight onto a pressure plate, pulling on a lever, or redirecting light with a mirror. Core mechanics are done best when they're logical and easily understood. The simpler, the better. And of course you can have multiple core mechanics in your puzzle, but when you're first starting out, we definitely recommend you start with just one. Next, we have the obstacles. These are elements that directly impede on the player's ability to interact with the core mechanic. For example, perhaps a lever that needs to be pulled is hidden behind a wall, or the box that needs to be put on the pressure plate is far up where the players can't reach it. As you can imagine, adding an obstacle to the puzzle can even make a straightforward problem infinitely more complex. Of course, this is where TTRPGs can shine over how video games work. Whereas the video game is bound to its code and programming, in TTRPGs, the GM has the ability to yay or nay on certain solutions, depending on how logical and creative they might be. On top of that, the players have so many resources to draw upon, they might come up with a solution that the GM didn't expect at all. Obstacles can also provide a method of environmental storytelling. For example, if a lever has been deteriorated by time or tampered with by an outside party, this could be clues to the overarching story of the puzzle's design. While obstacles impede directly on the player's interaction with the core mechanic, the catch is what contradicts that core mechanic completely. For example, stepping on a pressure plate may open the door, but removing the weight from that pressure plate will close the door. This is usually what leads to the players having their aha moment, and it can really make puzzles rewarding. In a lot of ways, I think the catch overlaps a bit with the definition we used for obstacles. And you could think of the catch as the main obstacle that the players have to overcome in order to solve the puzzle. Just like with core mechanics, it's probably a good idea to start with a single catch, although you can probably imagine how complex things could get when you involve multiple core mechanics and multiple catches. Moving on to folded mechanics, as defined by our author, these are certain mechanics that unfold as the players proceed through the puzzle. The example the author gives is a room with 2 doors, 2 boxes, and a single pressure plate. When you put one box on the first pressure plate, a door opens, revealing another pressure plate inside. When you put the second box on that one, that's when the second door, the exit, opens up to reveal the way out. By completing the first requirement, the players have unlocked a new element to interact with. Folded mechanics aren't necessary for a good puzzle, but they are a common way that game designers show progress to the player, and it entices them to keep going until they've completed the whole thing. And lastly, we come to clues and feedback. Assuming you've got all the other elements and a well thought out solution to your puzzle, this is where things can go wonderfully right or horribly wrong. Clues and feedback are the way the game master communicates the pieces of the puzzle to the players and allows them to put everything together. Clues consist of information that guide the player towards the solution. These could be explicit, such as a written warning on the puzzle indicating some sort of a trap, or a skeleton revealing that there have been people who have come to this puzzle before and failed to solve it. Feedback is simply informing the players of the results of their actions. For example, when they pull the lever, the door slides open. This is where things can get pretty tricky. Because TTRPGs are at their core a game of communication between the GM and the players, if you inadequately describe the results of a player's actions, they may get really confused or simply misunderstand what is going on in the game world. And although we've defined these things last, honestly, feedback and clues are probably the first thing you want to reveal to your players. Without it, they can't start the puzzle in the first place. And make sure that you take care to see what kind of information you're giving as explicit or implicit information. That way, the puzzle doesn't feel too easy or too challenging for any given player at the table. Remember, it's better to lean towards making things too easy rather than too difficult. The puzzle is only one element of your game. You want to get used to helping your players find that sense of accomplishment before you start presenting more intricate problems to them. Otherwise, the players may get frustrated and it can put the whole table off from using puzzles in the future. And that just limits the kinds of experiences your players can have. So now, let's create our sample puzzle using all of these elements. This is going to be informed by the puzzle's context in the story. For our puzzle, let's say the players are trying to open up a gate to the Underdark. It's the only entrance to that region, which is why they're here. The players step into this bright room with 3 shafts of light reflecting off of mirror-covered walls around them. They see, at the end of the room, a door. To open that door, they're going to have to turn off the light in this room. And to do that, they're going to need to pull 3 different levers, one corresponding to each shaft of light. So now let's introduce our folded mechanic. In the middle of the room, there's a pressure plate, all painted in black with a path leading from it towards the door. In order to reveal the levers, something heavy, ideally a player, will have to be placed on top of that pressure plate to show where the levers are hidden. And whatever or whoever it is going to have to stay there the entire time while those levers are being pulled. This brings us to the catch. Stepping on the pressure plate reveals 3 large eye-like crystals etched into the door in front of them. These crystals shoot radiant beams of energy at the party, starting with the player or object that's on the pressure plate. After one round of that, they randomly start targeting other creatures in the room. This is where we have to consider whether or not we want a turn order. Because there's an imminent threat, I'm inclined to say yes, but you can make up your own mind here. Now, the players might not know it, but the crystal eyes are actually only able to fire at them if they can see them. So as long as there's light in the room, the players will be constantly on the lookout for whether or not they're being targeted by the eye ray. Where did these crystal eyes come from? Well, they were part of the original design from the creators who wanted to stop things from getting out from the Underdark. They didn't want just anybody opening up the gate after all. Pretty nasty, isn't it? It's quite the dilemma to have one player essentially act as bait while the others go and pull the levers to get everybody out of danger. So what's the solution? Well, the intended solution is lying in the hands of that skeleton we mentioned earlier. It's holding a black stone, which allows a player to absorb the radiant energy from the eye beams without getting hurt. Ideally, the person on the pressure plate will be the one holding it when everything goes to hell. But that's up to your players to figure out. However, there is an incidental obstacle that may come up as the players pull all the levers. Darkness. This may not be so much of an issue in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons when so many player characters have dark vision, but it's kinda neat to think about and pretty thematic. So, with all this in mind, how do we communicate things to the players without spoiling everything? Well, here's one clue we can use: an inscription upon the door that the players notice upon entering the room. It reads, "Live in the dark, die in the light." It is a little cryptic to be sure, but it is a clue, one of three. As mentioned before, we have a skeleton in the room, a previous occupant, or perhaps somebody who is trying to solve the puzzle themselves. Unfortunately, they seem to have been killed by an onslaught of arrows. This could be revealed by some sort of check that the players make at the DM's discretion. And although it's a bit of a red herring, it could lead to uncovering a little bit more lore about this puzzle down the road. Finally, we have a clue regarding the pressure plate in the middle of the room. There's a black painted path leading from it to the door, which shows that they're connected, and it has some boot prints on it, which tells the players that other people have been there before. Now, they might be suspicious. In fact, they probably will be. Many players may take an obnoxious amount of time deliberating if it's even worth stepping on the pressure plate, with whatever unknown risks may come. This is where you're going to be starting to give them a little bit more information. Perhaps they are able to see the indentations on the wall where the levers will soon be revealed, and they'll notice that these levers are connected to the puzzle. Perhaps a check reveals that the skeleton in the corner was killed by weapons, not a trap. They never got to use that black stone in their hand. Maybe the players will find evidence of where the levers are hidden and connect the dots between the levers and the pressure plate. It's important to recognize that a lot of suspicion is born from tales of players trying some things out and the GM overly punishing them for this. If a puzzle is a type of challenge that you want to give your players in the future, it's important that you don't punish them too badly for trying new things out, even things that aren't even related to the puzzle. Maybe a player steps on a pressure plate, but they can see that these crystal eyes are opening up and beginning to charge their rays, and you give them enough time to step off of it without any danger. This kind of feedback gives players a lot of information without punishing them so much that they don't want to try the puzzle at all. Now, as I mentioned before, many players will come up with solutions that you hadn't even thought of when it comes to your puzzle. That's the brilliance of TTRPGs. They have so many resources, so many tools at their disposal that they're bound to come up with something creative or think outside the box in one way or another. For instance, maybe a player goes invisible and they notice that the eyes only target people that they can see. Then they cast darkness on the eyes, which completely mitigates that threat. Perhaps a player can cast Speak with Dead, and they interview the skeleton and ask them about exactly what went down before their untimely demise. This could help them understand more about the puzzle, but also about the potential dangers in the room around them. Or maybe you have a bear totem barbarian in the party, and they're deciding that, hey, I'll use one of my rages for this, and they just tank those eye rays so that the rest of the party can pull those levers when it's time. That's the beauty of all this. There's more than one right answer to the puzzle. Finally, we're on the last step, which is completely optional but can be really immersive for certain tables: the lore. Long ago, a civilization of dwarves built a gate over the world's only entrance to the Underdark to stop monsters from attacking them. These monsters have a light phobia, they noticed, so they surrounded this gate with mirrors in case anything broke through. But the dwarves were cautious and left a way to get through the gate in case something unforeseen in the future forced them to retreat underground. The key, they decided, was a special black stone entrusted only to certain dwarves that had originally engineered the gate and their descendants. One day, that unforeseen force attacked, and the dwarves disappeared from the world above, closing the gate behind them. Perhaps the players are investigating exactly what happened to these dwarves, or perhaps they just need to explore the Underdark for some other reason. The players enter the room of mirrored walls and see the tall door standing at the other end. They notice something written on the huge door in Dwarvish, and upon further inspection it reads, "When doom calls our name and there are none left to fight, walk upon the shadowed plain, live in the dark, die in the light." In the corner is a skeleton folded over and forgotten by time. In the middle of the floor is a black pressure plate with a black painted path leading to the door, upon which they notice 3 crystalline structures that resemble eyes. Stepping on the pressure plate reveals 3 levers on the floor and opens these eyes. Stepping on the pressure plate reveals 3 levers on the floor and opens these eyes. They fire radiant beams of light at the pressure plate first, then target the other players. When a player tries pulling a lever, they notice the corresponding eye closes, and the room gets a little bit dimmer. When all 3 are closed, the room is completely dark, and and the door rumbles open. And that's it. That's our video on puzzles. What did you think of the example we came up with? Did this video help you at all? What do you think of puzzles in TTRPGs in general? I think we should do a follow-up video in the future after I've had a chance to really playtest the puzzle that we came up with today. Personally, I'm really excited to try it out. If you like this video, let YouTube know by pressing like and leaving a comment down below to appease the almighty algorithm. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys next time.